My name is Jennifer, and I am 24 years old. I never thought my communications degree would lead to this moment, standing in an empty bedroom with a suitcase in hand. Just yesterday at dinner, Dad dropped the bomb about charging rent, calling my startup job worthless. Mom piled on, saying I needed to learn respect. After weeks of being called dead weight, I made my choice. Now my phone won't stop ringing with their panicked voices. If you are watching this from your childhood bedroom, wondering about your own escape, hit that like button and subscribe. I promise by the end of my story, you will see why sometimes leaving is the only way forward. I grew up in a household where expectations loomed larger than the suburban home we lived in. My father, Thomas, has worked as a middle manager at Madison Financial Group for 25 years. He wears the same style of pressed shirts every day and believes success comes in only a few acceptable packages: law, medicine, or business. Nothing else would do. My mother, Diana, teaches advanced placement chemistry at the local high school. She grades papers with a red pen and life choices with equal scrutiny. From an early age, they plotted my future with the precision of architects. When I showed creative inclinations, they enrolled me in STEM summer camps. When I excelled in writing, they suggested law school applications. The plan was clear, and deviation was not an option. My communications degree was already a compromise that caused 3 months of tense dinners and pointed comparisons to my cousin Jason, who was accepted to medical school last year. After graduation 4 months ago, I landed a job at Bright Vision Creative, a startup focusing on digital content and innovative marketing campaigns. The office is a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls, communal workspaces, and a ping-pong table that doubles as our meeting space on busy days. My starting salary is $32,000 a year. My father nearly choked when I told him, pointing out that his newest intern makes more. But what the company lacks in immediate financial rewards, it makes up for in potential and purpose. We work with small businesses trying to find their voice in a crowded market. Last week, I helped a family-owned bakery increase their social media engagement by 300%. The owner cried when she saw the results. That moment was worth more than any paycheck to me. My bedroom at my parents' house had slowly transformed into a space that reflected my passions. The walls were covered with concept boards and color palettes. My desk overflowed with notebooks filled with campaign ideas and client notes. It was more than just a room. It was the physical manifestation of the path I had chosen, despite my parents' disapproval. Sarah became my closest ally at work. She started 3 months before me and took me under her wing immediately. At 25, she had already carved out her role as the go-to person for crisis management and difficult clients. Her apartment is a tiny one-bedroom in the Arts District, decorated with thrift store finds and plants that somehow thrive despite her self-proclaimed black thumb. When we work late, we order Thai food and brainstorm ideas on her living room floor, surrounded by takeout containers and possibility. The divide between my parents' expectations and my reality grew wider with each passing week. During Sunday dinners, my father would casually mention law school application deadlines or MBA programs with late admission. My mother would slip business cards of her former students who now worked at prestigious firms under my plate. The message was clear. This creative phase needed to end, and a real career needed to begin. I tried explaining the digital economy to them, how startups work, how building a portfolio and connections now could lead to significant opportunities later. I showed them campaigns I had worked on, metrics of success, client testimonials. But they saw only the small paycheck and the unconventional office. To them, success had a very specific look, and my current situation did not match that image. Their disappointment manifested in 1,000 small ways. My mother stopped asking about my day. My father began referring to my job as my little project. Family photos from my cousin's wedding were displayed prominently, while my college graduation picture mysteriously migrated to a drawer. These were subtle changes, but they cut deeper than outright criticism. Still, I maintained hope. I believed that with enough time and proven success, they would come to understand my choices. I imagined the moment when my father would finally nod with approval after hearing about a major client I landed. I pictured my mother bragging to her fellow teachers about her daughter, the creative director. That hope kept me going through the increasingly tense family dinners and pointed comments. It was a hope that would soon be tested beyond what I could have imagined. The shift from disappointed sighs to outright criticism happened gradually, then suddenly. 3 weeks ago, my father cornered me in the kitchen as I made my morning coffee. He held up his phone, showing me a LinkedIn notification. "Do you know Amanda Peters from your graduating class? She just accepted a position at Goldman Sachs. Starting salary is $75,000, he said, stirring his coffee with unnecessary force. "Meanwhile, you are playing around with Instagram posts for coffee shops." I tried to explain that Amanda had studied finance, that our career paths were entirely different, but he had already walked away, leaving me with cooling coffee and simmering frustration. Later that same week, my mother invited the neighbors over for dinner. Their daughter Bethany works as a loan officer at the local bank. Throughout the entire meal, my mother orchestrated the conversation to highlight Bethany's recent promotion and new car purchase. When Bethany mentioned her company was hiring, my mother practically leaped across the table. "Jennifer is actually quite good with computers. Perhaps there is something in your IT department," my mother suggested, ignoring the fact that my degree and experience had nothing to do with information technology. The neighbors looked uncomfortable. Bethany offered a sympathetic smile. I excused myself early, claiming work deadlines. The comments became more frequent and less veiled. My father began referring to my job as playing pretend. My mother questioned when I would start looking for real work. They began leaving career change articles on my bed. Brochures for graduate programs appeared on my nightstand like unwanted gifts. Then came the family reunion. Every year, the extended family gathers at my Uncle Frank's lake house for a weekend of forced bonding and thinly veiled competition. This year, my cousin Jason dominated the conversation with stories from his first semester of medical school. My Aunt Patricia asked about my job, and before I could answer, my father jumped in. "Oh, Jennifer is still figuring things out. She makes little videos for Instagram," he said, waving his hand dismissively. I tried to correct him to explain the comprehensive marketing strategies I helped develop, but my Uncle Frank interrupted. "You know, my golf buddy's firm is looking for a receptionist. Good benefits. Might be a stepping stone to something better," he offered, as if he was doing me a favor. My mother nodded enthusiastically. "That sounds perfect for Jennifer, while she decides what she really wants to do." The assumption that my current path was temporary, a phase to be outgrown rather than a career to be built, stung more than outright criticism. The rest of the weekend was a blur of similar comments and suggestions, each one chipping away at my resolve. The tension escalated further when I received my first performance review at work. Michael, my supervisor, praised my initiative and creativity. The review came with a small bonus of $500, which I was proud of given my short tenure. When I shared this news at dinner, hoping for even reluctant acknowledgement, my parents exchanged glances. $500, my father scoffed. "My year-end bonus last year was $15,000. And you think this validates your choice?" "It is not about the amount, Dad. It is about being recognized for good work After only a few months, I tried to explain. Good work making Instagram posts, my mother added. Such valuable contribution to society. The sarcasm in her voice made me push away from the table. When I started to leave, my father called after me. This is exactly the problem. You cannot handle constructive criticism. The real world is not going to coddle you like your little startup playground. I stopped in the doorway. That is not fair. You have no idea what my job actually entails or how hard I work. Work, my mother laughed. You sit in a warehouse playing on computers all day. Your father and I know what real work looks like. The arguments became more frequent. Each day brought new comparisons to more successful peers or relatives. Each dinner included at least one comment about wasted potential or the ticking clock of career development. But it was the term dead weight that cut the deepest. It first appeared during a heated discussion about household expenses. My father was reviewing the family budget at the kitchen table, making disapproving noises as he scrolled through spreadsheets. Do you know how much our utility bills have increased since you moved back home? He asked, without looking up. I offered to contribute, but he waved me off. With what money your little hobby barely pays for your cell phone. You are just dead weight on this household budget. Dead weight. The term lingered in the air, heavy and accusatory. My mother, rather than defending me, nodded in agreement. From that point on, the term became their favorite description. Dead weight on the family finances. Dead weight career-wise. Dead weight while your peers are moving forward. Each time they used it, something inside me hardened. Each repetition built a wall between us, brick by painful brick. I began spending more time at work, volunteering for late projects. I started having dinner with Sarah, or eating alone in my room. Home no longer felt like home. It had become a battlefield where my choices were under constant attack, and retreat seemed like the only viable strategy. Tuesday night dinners had always been pot roast night in our house. My mother's recipe, passed down from her mother, was a family tradition that persisted through arguments, busy schedules, and life changes. The familiar smell of beef, carrots, and potatoes usually brought comfort, but that particular Tuesday, it only heightened my anxiety as I sat down at our oak dining table. My father had just returned from a business trip to Chicago. He wore his success like a shield, regaling us with stories of important meetings and executive lunches before we had even passed the salt. My mother nodded at appropriate intervals, her perfect posture and attentive expression, a performance she had mastered over 27 years of marriage. So, how was everyone's day? My mother asked after my father's stories concluded, though her eyes remained on him as if expecting an encore. Productive, my father answered, cutting his meat with precision. The Jensen account is finally moving forward. I had a good day too, I ventured, seeing an opening. The small business feature I worked on got picked up by several local blogs, and the clients saw their website traffic triple overnight. My father's knife paused mid-cut. He exchanged a look with my mother that I had come to recognize. It was the look that preceded disappointment. Blogs, he repeated, making the word sound like a communicable disease. And this is success in your world. It actually is, Dad. Small businesses rely on digital traffic for growth, and we help this client reach potential customers they never could have accessed otherwise. He resumed cutting his meat. When I was your age, I was working on accounts worth millions, not helping coffee shops get Instagram likes. They are not just Instagram likes, I began, but my mother interrupted. Jennifer, your father and I have been talking, she said, folding her napkin with unnecessary precision. We think it is time you started contributing to this household financially. I looked between them, confused. I had offered to contribute to groceries or utilities before, but they had always refused, saying it was unnecessary given my entry-level salary. "What do you mean?" I asked. My father set down his utensils and looked me directly in the eyes. "Starting next month, you will pay rent if you want to stay here." The words hung in the air like suspended particles, visible and suffocating. "Rent?" I repeated. "How much rent?" $800 a month, my father stated flatly. "That is well below market rate for this area, and it includes utilities. Very generous, all things considered." $800 was nearly a third of my monthly take-home pay. After student loan payments, car insurance, and other essentials, it would leave me with barely enough for gas and food, let alone savings. "That is a lot of money on my current salary," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe we could discuss a more graduated approach. I could start with a smaller amount and increase it as my income grows." My mother's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "That is exactly the problem with your generation. Always wanting special accommodations instead of facing reality. Maybe paying rent will teach you some respect for what things actually cost in the real world." "I am not disrespectful," I countered, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "I understand financial responsibility. I am just asking for some flexibility while I build my career." "Career," my father scoffed. "Playing on social media is not a career, Jennifer. It is a distraction. This rent situation might finally motivate you to look for real employment." I set my fork down, appetite gone. My job is real employment. We provide valuable services to clients who need digital expertise. Just because it does not look like your idea of success does not make it invalid. My father leaned forward, his face flushing. "Your little startup is a fantasy. Half of these companies fold within a year. You are betting your future on a house of cards, and we are not going to subsidize this delusion any longer." "We are not asking you to change careers," my mother added, though her tone suggested otherwise. "We are simply asking you to contribute financially or consider options that would allow you to do so." "By options, you mean abandoning my current job for something you approve of," I clarified. "By options, we mean growing up," my father snapped. "Do you know what we call someone who lives in our house, eats our food, uses our utilities, and contributes nothing? Dead weight. That is what you have become, Jennifer. Dead weight." The term hit me like a physical blow. It was not the first time they had used it, but in this context, as justification for essentially pushing me toward financial instability, it carried new cruelty. "I am not dead weight," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I work hard. I am building something. I just need some time." "Time is money," my father replied, returning to his dinner as if the matter was settled. "And starting next month, staying in this house will cost you $800. If that does not work for you, there are other arrangements you can make." My mother nodded in agreement, then changed the subject to neighborhood gossip, as if we had just been discussing the weather, rather than upending my financial situation. I pushed food around my plate, no longer hungry, as their words echoed in my mind. Dead weight, other arrangements. The message was clear. My presence in their home had become a transaction, and my value was measured in dollars rather than connection. I excused myself early, claiming a headache. Neither of them seemed particularly concerned. As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, I heard their conversation continue without interruption, my absence barely creating a ripple in their evening. Standing in my room, surrounded by evidence of my passions and ambitions, I felt a clarity I had not experienced before. This house was no longer my home. It was a place where my dreams went to die, suffocated by expectations I would never meet, and standards I no longer wanted to achieve. Back in my bedroom, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall covered in concept boards and campaign ideas. The creative space I had carefully cultivated now felt like an island in a hostile sea. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my phone and dialed Sarah's number. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, what's up?" she asked, her voice bright against the heaviness in my chest. "They want to charge me rent," I said without preamble. $800 a month starting next month. Sarah's sharp intake of breath told me she understood the implications immediately. "That's almost a third of your take-home pay." "I know." I gulped down the emotion rising in my throat. "They called me dead weight, Sarah," to my face, at dinner. The silence on the other end lasted just a moment too long. "I know we've joked about you moving out before, but my guest room futon is yours if you want it. For real." The offer hung between us, suddenly transforming from a hypothetical escape plan to a tangible possibility. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. It's not fancy, but it's yours for as long as you need. No rent for the first 2 months while you save up. Just help with utilities and groceries." Something loosened in my chest. A plan began forming in my mind, possibilities unfurling like a map to a new destination. What had seemed impossible minutes ago now felt inevitable. "I think I might take you up on that," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. After hanging up, I sat in silence, mentally calculating what this decision would mean. My monthly budget would be tight, but manageable without rent for a couple of months. I could increase my hours at work to build savings faster. The startup was growing, and Michael had hinted at possible advancement opportunities. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became. Staying meant surrendering not just my financial independence, but my self-respect. It meant acknowledging that my choices, my passions, my career path were somehow less valid than the traditional routes my parents valued. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I began the careful process of sorting through my belongings. The essentials went into one pile: clothes, toiletries, important documents, my laptop, and equipment. Sentimental items formed another smaller pile: photos, journals, a few books that had shaped my thinking. Everything else could stay or be retrieved later. I found my large suitcase in the back of my closet, still bearing airport tags from my semester abroad in junior year. As I began folding clothes into neat piles, each item represented a decision, a commitment to this new path. My favorite sweaters and work-appropriate outfits took priority. Summer clothes could wait. Shoes were limited to the most versatile pairs. My desk presented more difficult choices. The notebooks filled with ideas and campaign drafts were coming with me, non-negotiable. My collection of marketing books would have to be selectively culled. The framed diploma that had prompted so many disparaging comments from my parents was carefully wrapped in a soft sweater. As my room slowly emptied of the most essential items, a strange feeling settled over me. This space, which had been my sanctuary since childhood, was becoming less mine, with each item packed away. The concept boards remained on the walls, too large to transport now. The fairy lights still twinkled around my window frame. To casual observation, the room would still appear occupied, but its heart was being carefully removed and packed into a suitcase. Around 3 a.m, I sat at my desk and wrote a brief note. I kept it simple, unemotional. "I've decided to find other arrangements as suggested. I'll be in touch when I'm settled. Please don't worry, Jennifer." No explanation, no accusations, no emotional plea. Just a statement of fact. I placed it on my pillow where it would be found, though I suspected it might be hours before anyone noticed my absence. The most difficult part was waiting for morning. I needed to leave when the house was empty to avoid confrontation. My father typically left for work at 7:30. My mother departed for school by 7:45. I set my alarm for 8, giving them both time to be well on their way. When morning arrived, I moved with quiet efficiency. The suitcase already packed needed only the last few items from the bathroom. My backpack held my laptop and important documents. A small duffel contained additional clothes. Everything I deemed essential for this next chapter fit into these 3 bags. It was surprisingly little considering. I made my bed one last time, smoothing the comforter with a gesture that felt ceremonial. The note remained centered on my pillow, a small white flag of surrender and declaration combined. With one last look around, I closed the door softly behind me. The house was silent. As I descended the stairs, my footsteps deliberately light. In the kitchen, I hesitated. Some childish part of me had hoped for a last-minute intervention. A parent appearing to ask where I was going. A chance for explanation or reconciliation. But the kitchen remained empty, the coffee maker still warm but abandoned. I stepped outside into the morning sunshine, loaded my bags into my car, and backed out of the driveway of my childhood home. The finality of the moment hit me as I reached the corner of our street. I was really doing this. At 24, I was choosing independence over security, self-respect over comfort, uncertainty over familiar disapproval. Sarah was waiting when I arrived at her apartment building, a small 2-story complex with a courtyard in the center. She helped me carry my bags up to her second-floor unit, a cozy 1-bedroom with mismatched furniture and abundant plants. The guest area consisted of a futon in the corner of her living room, now made up with clean sheets and a pile of towels at its foot. "It's not much," she apologized, setting my suitcase down. "It's perfect," I replied, and meant it. The space was small but represented something immeasurable, freedom from constant judgment and the opportunity to define success on my own terms. Those first days in Sarah's apartment were an adjustment. The futon was less comfortable than my bed at home. The morning routine required coordination with Sarah for bathroom access. The commute to work was shorter, but meant navigating a new neighborhood. Yet, despite these small inconveniences, I felt lighter than I had in months. Each morning I woke up without dreading breakfast table criticisms. Each evening, I returned to a space where my career choices were respected rather than denigrated. Sarah never made me feel like a burden. We developed a rhythm, quickly sharing cooking duties and cleaning responsibilities. She introduced me to neighbors in the building, most of them young professionals or graduate students with their own stories of reinvention and independence. For the first time since graduation, I felt part of a community that understood the path I was choosing. By the end of that first week, I had established a new normal. What I hadn't prepared for was how quickly my parents would notice my absence or how dramatically they would react when they did. Living in Sarah's apartment required immediate adjustments to nearly every aspect of my daily routine. The futon, while better than sleeping on the floor, introduced me to back muscles I never knew existed. The bathroom, designed for one person, became a carefully choreographed dance of shower schedules and counter space negotiations. The kitchen barely fit one person comfortably, let alone 2 trying to prepare separate meals. Yet these physical constraints brought unexpected freedom. Without my spacious childhood bedroom filled with accumulated possessions, I found myself surrounded only by what truly mattered. My laptop, my essential clothes, my notebooks of ideas. The minimalism was clarifying, forcing me to distinguish between wants and needs in ways I had never considered. Financial reality hit hard and fast. My first morning at Sarah's, I sat at her small kitchen table with my laptop, creating a detailed budget spreadsheet. Monthly income, $2,600 after taxes. student loan payment $350, car payment and insurance $400, cell phone $90. That left approximately $1,760 for everything else. Once I would start contributing to Sarah's expenses, about $400 for utilities and groceries, I would have roughly $1,360 remaining. It was enough to live on, but barely. There would be no room for shopping dinners out or unexpected expenses. Every dollar needed careful allocation. I immediately canceled my subscription services, switched to a cheaper cell phone plan, and researched public transportation options to reduce gas expenses. I downloaded a meal planning app to maximize grocery efficiency and minimize food waste. These were small changes individually, but collectively they represented a new mindset of intentional financial management. At work, I approached Michael about increasing my hours. The conversation took place in the small conference room that doubled as a storage space for marketing materials. I was hoping to pick up some additional hours, I explained. I am flexible about the projects or responsibilities. Michael leaned back in his chair, studying me. Any particular reason for the sudden interest in overtime? I hesitated, then decided on honesty. I recently moved out of my parents' house. My budget is tight while I adjust. His expression shifted from curiosity to understanding. I can't offer much in terms of guaranteed overtime, but we do have that small business incubator project starting next week. It would mean some evening work and possibly weekends. The budget is tight, but I could allocate another 5 to 7 hours weekly. That would be perfect, I said, relief evident in my voice. He nodded, then added, "You know, Jennifer, your work has been exceptional these past few months. Keep this up, and we might be having a different conversation about your position when reviews come around in January." That possibility, however, distant, gave me something concrete to work toward. Each extra hour at the office became not just about immediate financial necessity, but about building toward future stability. Word of my situation spread quickly through our small office. Not the details, but enough for colleagues to understand I was navigating a significant transition. Their support manifested in small but meaningful ways. Tara, from accounting, invited me to her bulk shopping trips at Costco. Derek, our IT specialist, helped me find a cheaper cell phone plan. Even our normally reserved office manager, Patricia, began bringing in occasional leftovers from her family dinners, casually offering them to anyone interested, but somehow always making sure I received a portion. The small business incubator project became my primary focus. It involved working with 5 local entrepreneurs to develop digital marketing strategies within extremely limited budgets. The challenge was substantial, maximum impact with minimal expenditure. It was exactly the kind of problem solving that had drawn me to this field. During one particularly late evening at the office, I found myself alone with Michael as we finalized presentation materials for the incubator's launch event. "You know," he said, reviewing my slides, "there is a senior content strategist position opening up next quarter. It would be a significant step up both in responsibility and compensation. Probably around $45,000 a year." I tried to keep my expression neutral despite the jolt of excitement. "That sounds like an amazing opportunity." "It is typically reserved for someone with at least 3 years' experience," he continued, "but exceptions can be made for exceptional talent." He closed the laptop and looked at me directly. "If you continue performing at this level, I would consider putting your name forward." That conversation replayed in my mind as I researched apartment listings on my lunch breaks. A promotion like that would change everything. It would mean a real apartment of my own, not just a temporary solution. It would mean financial stability. It would mean vindicating my career choice in the most tangible way possible. Apartment hunting became a secondary job in itself. During evenings, when I wasn't working extra hours, I scrolled through listings and visited potential neighborhoods. The reality was sobering. Even the most basic studios in safe areas started around $900 monthly, not including utilities. Most required proof of income at least 3 times the rent amount, which was currently beyond my reach. Still, I began touring places to understand the market better. A tiny studio apartment in a converted industrial building caught my attention. At $850, it stretched my current budget beyond comfort, but it was within reach of what I could afford if the promotion materialized. The space was barely 500 square feet, with concrete floors and exposed ductwork, but it had large windows and was walking distance to a grocery store and bus line. I could picture myself there, my futon against one wall, a small desk by the window, perhaps a bookshelf for the marketing books currently stored in boxes at Sarah's. It wasn't just an apartment. It was a tangible goal, something to work toward that represented complete independence. As my external circumstances evolved, I noticed internal changes as well. Decision-making, once a process fraught with second-guessing and concern about parental approval, became more straightforward. Without the constant background noise of criticism, I could hear my own instincts more clearly. When the incubator project required a choice between 2 competing strategies, I trusted my analysis rather than seeking validation. When personal decisions arose from meal choices to weekend plans, I made them based on my preferences rather than anticipated reactions. This newfound decisiveness extended to boundaries in other relationships. When a client made unreasonable demands about timeline, I negotiated firmly rather than acquiescing to avoid conflict. When a colleague consistently interrupted me during meetings, I began calmly but directly reclaiming the conversation. These were small assertions, but they represented a significant shift in how I navigated professional and personal interactions. The hardest moments came unexpectedly. Walking past a restaurant where our family had celebrated birthdays, hearing a song that had played during road trips to visit relatives, finding a birthday card from my parents in the pages of a book I had packed. These moments would hit like sudden gusts of wind, temporarily unbalancing me with waves of doubt and homesickness. During one such moment, sitting on Sarah's futon, after finding an old family photo in my wallet, I nearly called home. My finger hovered over my father's contact information, the muscle memory of seeking parental guidance in moments of uncertainty still strong. But I set the phone down, recognizing that reconnection needed to happen on different terms than before. If and when we spoke again, it would be as adults with mutual respect, not as a child seeking approval. Instead of calling home, I reached out to expand my new support network. I accepted an invitation to dinner with Emma, a graphic designer who lived in the apartment below Sarah's. At 29, she had navigated her own family expectations about her creative career and offered perspective I found invaluable. I joined a professional networking group for marketing professionals, meeting monthly at a local brewery to share industry insights and job opportunities. Slowly, I was building connections that validated rather than questioned my path. People who understood the value of creative work and the potential of digital marketing. People who measured success not by salary alone but by impact, growth, and fulfillment. These relationships reinforced my confidence in the choices I had made, even as I acknowledged the difficulties those choices entailed. By the end of that first week of independence, I had established new routines, created a sustainable budget, increased my work responsibilities, researched future housing options, and begun building a supportive community. I had also experienced moments of doubt, financial anxiety, and homesickness. But each day brought increasing certainty that I had made the right decision not just for my career, but for my sense of self. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly my absence would register at home, or how dramatically my parents would react when confronted with the physical reality of my departure. Exactly 1 week after I left home, my phone rang during a team meeting at work. Seeing my mother's name on the screen, I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, heart suddenly racing. In 7 days, neither of my parents had called or texted. I had assumed they were giving me space, or more likely making a point about my decision. The timing of this call precisely 1 week later suggested they had only just discovered my absence. "Hello," I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Jennifer, where are you?" My mother's voice was pitched higher than normal, edged with panic. "Your room is empty. Are you okay?" The question caught me off guard. After weeks of criticism and that final confrontation about rent concern, for my well-being seemed incongruous. "I am fine, Mom. I am at work." "But your room," she continued, words tumbling out rapidly. "Half your clothes are gone. Your laptop is gone. What happened?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the wall. "I found other arrangements like Dad suggested. I left a note on my pillow, explaining that." "A note?" "There was no note, Jennifer." There was a pause, then muffled conversation, as she presumably spoke to my father. I heard him in the background, his voice growing louder, as he apparently moved closer to the phone. "Give me that," he said, and then his voice came through clearly. "Jennifer, what the hell is going on? Where are you living? Why would you just disappear without telling anyone?" The accusatory tone immediately set my defenses on edge. "I did leave a note, Dad. It explained that I was finding other arrangements, as you suggested during our dinner conversation about rent. I have moved in with a friend, temporarily, while I look for my own place. Is this some kind of tantrum because we asked you to contribute financially?" His voice held that familiar note of dismissal that had characterized so many recent interactions. This is exactly the kind of immature reaction I was talking about. "It is not a tantrum," I replied, working to keep my voice steady. "It is a logical response to the situation. You made it clear that staying would cost $800 a month, which is nearly a third of my income. I made a financial decision based on the parameters you set." "We didn't think you would actually leave," my mother interjected, having apparently reclaimed the phone. "We thought you would reconsider your job situation." The admission stunned me into momentary silence. The rent demand had never been about financial contribution. It had been a manipulation tactic designed to force me to abandon my chosen career path. The clarity of this realization strengthened my resolve. "So, the rent requirement wasn't about me contributing to household expenses," I said slowly. "It was about pressuring me to quit my job and find something you approve of." "Don't twist our words," my father replied back on the phone. "We are concerned about your future. This startup nonsense is a dead end, and you are wasting your potential." "That's your opinion, Dad. I happen to disagree." "So you would rather live, God knows where, than reconsider your options." The incredulity in his voice suggested he still couldn't grasp that I had made a choice he hadn't anticipated. "I am living with Sarah," I clarified. "It is a safe arrangement while I save for my own place. And yes, I would rather do this than abandon a career path I believe in." "This is ridiculous, Jennifer," my mother cut in. "You had everything you needed at home. A comfortable room, home-cooked meals, laundry facilities. And you gave that up over $800. "I gave it up over respect, Mom, or rather the lack of it. The constant criticism, the dismissal of my work, calling me dead weight. The money was just the final straw." Silence followed this statement, stretching uncomfortably until my father spoke again, his tone shifting from anger to negotiation. Look, perhaps we were a bit harsh. If you come home, we can discuss a more reasonable arrangement. Maybe no rent for now. The offer dangled like bait, designed to lure me back into the familiar pattern. 6 months ago, I might have accepted it, eagerly grateful for the reprieve and willing to endure the underlying disapproval in exchange for comfort and approval. But something fundamental had changed. I appreciate the offer, Dad, but I am not coming home right now. I think we all need some space to reassess our relationship. Space, his voice rose again. Is that some therapy talk you picked up from your hipster coworkers? Families don't need space, Jennifer. They need commitment and respect. Respect goes both ways, I pointed out quietly. My career choices deserve respect too. This set off another round of arguments, with both parents taking turns on the phone. My father accused me of being ungrateful for the education they had provided. My mother suggested I was being influenced by negative peers. Both implied that my decision to leave was a betrayal of family values rather than a natural step toward adult independence. Throughout the conversation, I maintained a calm I didn't entirely feel. The hallway at work wasn't ideal for such a personal discussion, but it provided a physical and psychological distance that helped me maintain perspective. This wasn't about proving them wrong or winning an argument. It was about establishing boundaries and expectations for our relationship moving forward. You have embarrassed us in front of the neighbors, my mother said eventually. Mrs. Lawson asked about you yesterday, and I had no idea you had even left. I am sorry you felt embarrassed, Mom, but my housing decisions aren't about the neighbors. What about family dinner this Sunday? She pressed. Your aunt and uncle are coming over. I won't be there this week, I replied. Please give them my regards. This simple refusal seemed to finally drive home the reality of the situation. My mother's voice became tearful. So that's it. You're just cutting us off completely. I am not cutting anyone off, I clarified. I am establishing some healthy distance while I get settled. We can talk on the phone, maybe meet for coffee in a few weeks. But I need you both to understand that my career path and my independence aren't negotiable topics anymore. After hanging up, I leaned against the wall, physically drained by the exchange. The conversation had confirmed what I had suspected, but hadn't fully acknowledged their vision for my life had never included my actual preferences or ambitions. The rent demand had been a tactic, not a practical request. Their shock at my departure revealed how little they had understood my determination to forge my own path. That evening, the calls continued. My Aunt Barbara, clearly enlisted by my parents, left a voicemail expressing concern about my rash decision. My Uncle Frank texted asking if I needed money, implying financial distress was the only possible explanation for leaving home. Even my cousin Jason, the medical school golden child, messaged to check if I was having some kind of quarter-life crisis. I responded to each with brief but firm explanations. No, I wasn't in crisis. Yes, I had a roof over my head. No, this wasn't a temporary situation or an emotional reaction. It was a deliberate choice about the direction of my life and career. The family intervention reached its peak when my grandmother called, her voice wavering with confusion and concern. Jennifer, darling, your mother tells me you've run away from home. At your age, what's happening? I haven't run away, Grandma, I explained gently. I've moved out. It's what adults do eventually. But so suddenly, without discussion. It wasn't sudden from my perspective. It followed months of tension and a clear statement that staying would require financial contribution I couldn't reasonably afford. My grandmother's silence suggested she was processing this information, perhaps comparing it to whatever narrative my parents had provided. Well, she said, finally, your grandfather and I moved out of his parents' home 2 weeks after we married. His mother was quite controlling about how I kept house. Sometimes distance is necessary even with family. That simple validation from an unexpected source fortified my resolve. If my traditional grandmother could understand the need for independence and boundaries, perhaps eventually my parents would too. By the end of that day, I had fielded 7 separate calls from family members, each seeming to work from the same script of concern and confusion. I answered each with increasing confidence, the repetition helping me clarify my own position. This wasn't a temporary tantrum or a negotiating tactic. It was a fundamental shift in how I would allow myself to be treated and how I would make decisions moving forward. As challenging as these conversations were, they reinforced the rightness of my decision. Each call revealed how completely my parents had expected compliance rather than independent thought. Each concerned relative inadvertently highlighted how unusual it was in my family for someone to prioritize personal fulfillment over conventional expectations. That night, lying on Sarah's futon, I felt exhausted, but oddly peaceful. The confrontation I had been avoiding had happened, and I had survived it. My parents knew where I was, and that I was safe. They understood even if they didn't accept my decision to leave. The initial crisis had passed, and now began the longer, more complex process of redefining our relationship on new terms. Adult to adult. Independent to independent. With mutual respect as a non-negotiable condition. 3 months after that night, I packed my bags and left my childhood home. I stood in the center of my new apartment, surrounded by boxes yet to be unpacked. At 550 square feet, the studio wasn't large by any standard, but every inch of it represented a victory. The concrete floors had been softened with an area rug found at a thrift store. The white walls now held framed prints of my favorite marketing campaigns. The kitchen consisted of little more than a refrigerator, 2-burner stove, and approximately 3 feet of counter space, but it was mine, all mine. The journey to this moment had been more challenging than I had anticipated that first night on Sarah's futon. Financial independence required sacrifices I hadn't fully appreciated while living at home. Grocery shopping became an exercise in mathematical precision, calculating cost per meal down to the penny. Transportation demanded careful planning to minimize gas usage. Social outings were evaluated not just by interest, but by budget impact. Yet alongside these challenges came unexpected growth. 2 weeks after moving in, with Sarah, Michael had approached me about taking lead on the Small Business Incubator project. The role came with additional responsibility, but also a 10% salary increase. I had thrown myself into the work developing innovative strategies for businesses operating with minimal marketing budgets. The results had exceeded even the most optimistic projections. 3 of the 5 businesses reported revenue increases of over 30% within the first month of implementation. My success with the incubator project had not gone unnoticed. When the senior content strategist position opened up, Michael had advocated strongly for my candidacy despite my limited experience. The interview process had been grueling 3 rounds with increasingly senior management, a practical assessment requiring a comprehensive marketing strategy development, and a final presentation to the executive team. The day I received the offer letter, I had sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at the salary figure $48,000 annually with health benefits and a retirement plan contribution. More than I had dared hope for at this stage of my career. Enough to afford this apartment build savings and begin paying down my student loans more aggressively. Tangible validation of the path I had chosen. My relationship with my parents had evolved through careful, intentional steps. 2 weeks after their panicked phone call, I had suggested meeting for coffee at a neutral location. The cafe I selected was equidistant between their home and Sarah's apartment, a small symbolic gesture toward equal footing in our relationship. That first meeting had been awkward, characterized by surface-level conversation and carefully avoided topics. My mother had commented repeatedly on my appearance, suggesting I looked tired or thin. My father had asked pointed questions about my living situation, clearly searching for evidence of hardship he could use to justify his position. I had maintained firm boundaries, redirecting personal questions, and keeping the interaction brief. Subsequent meetings gradually improved. My parents, realizing I would not be manipulated back home, began adjusting to our new relationship dynamic. My promotion had been a turning point. When I shared the news over another cafe meeting, something shifted in my father's expression. Not full approval, but perhaps the beginning of reluctant respect. "Have they given you an employment contract?" he had asked, his first question related to job security rather than career legitimacy. "Yes, a 1-year renewable contract with performance reviews quarterly," I had replied, recognizing the significance of his question. This was his language, his way of acknowledging my work as a real career. My mother's adaptation had come in different forms. After initial resistance, she had asked to see my new apartment. Her visit had been brief, her assessment clinical, but she had brought a houseplant as a housewarming gift. A peace lily, she had explained, because they thrive even with minimal attention. I had recognized it as both a practical consideration for my busy schedule and a tentative olive branch. Healing continued in small increments. A text message asking about a work project, an invitation to Sunday dinner with the explicit promise of no career discussions. My attendance at family gatherings now as a visitor, rather than a resident, changed the dynamic in subtle but important ways. I arrived and departed on my own schedule. I participated in conversations as an adult among adults rather than a dependent child. Standing in my new apartment, I recognized how much I had grown in these 3 months. The Jennifer who had packed her bags in the middle of the night had been acting largely from hurt and defiance. The Jennifer unpacking those same bags into her own apartment was operating from confidence and self-determination. The difference was profound. The journey had taught me lessons I hadn't anticipated. Financial independence wasn't just about paying my own bills. It was about the dignity of making choices based on my values rather than external pressures. Professional growth wasn't measured solely in salary increases, but in the satisfaction of seeing my ideas implemented and making tangible differences for clients. Personal boundaries weren't selfish defenses, but necessary foundations for healthy relationships. Most surprisingly, I had discovered that my relationship with my parents could actually improve with distance. Without the daily friction of living under their roof and expectations, we could begin rebuilding our connection based on mutual respect rather than authority and compliance. We were still navigating this new territory, with occasional missteps and old patterns re-emerging, but the trajectory was hopeful. My phone chimed with a text message. My mother asking if I was free for lunch on Saturday. Another small step in our evolving relationship. I replied affirmatively, then set the phone aside and continued unpacking a box labeled "Kitchen," each plate and glass. A small piece of my independent life taking shape. The most profound lesson of these months had been about defining success on my own terms. My parents had a specific vision of achievement, traditional career path, financial security, above all else recognition in conventional forms. My vision looked different, work with meaning and impact, financial sufficiency, rather than wealth recognition from those who understood my industry and values. Neither vision was inherently wrong, but only one of them would lead to my personal fulfillment. By choosing my path despite resistance, I had learned to trust my own judgment above external validation. The approval I had sought so desperately from my parents had been replaced by something more valuable: self-approval and confidence in my choices. Sometimes, walking away is the only way to find your strength. Sometimes, creating distance is necessary to build healthier connections. Sometimes, disappointing others is required to avoid disappointing yourself. These truths had emerged from what had initially felt like crisis and rupture. The difficult decision to leave had ultimately created space for growth that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. As I placed the peace lily from my mother on the windowsill of my new apartment, I realized that true independence wasn't about separation, but about connection on more equal, healthy terms. It wasn't about never looking back, but about moving forward with clearer vision. It wasn't about rejecting family values, but about integrating them with personal values to create something authentic and sustainable. Have you ever had to walk away from something comfortable to grow? Or stood up for your path when everyone around you questioned it? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories, and share with anyone who might be facing similar crossroads in their family relationships or career. Thank you for witnessing my journey. And remember, sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most beautiful destinations.